We fear what might happen, but we don't think about what we're missing by not moving forward. Welcome to the Switch Podcast, where we explore powerful mindset shifts to help you feel better on mental health and life. I'm your host, Giovanni, and each episode we dive into stories, strategies, and insights to help you switch perspectives and thrive. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Let's get started. I want to talk about something that stops so many of us from moving forward. That thing is fear. Not just any type of fear, the fear that keeps you from starting, growing, or becoming who you're meant to be. But what if fear isn't just something to avoid? What if fear is actually a signal, a guide, pointing you towards something important? Today, we're going to talk about how to make the switch from letting fear control you to using fear as a tool to push forward. Let me ask you, have you ever had something you wanted to do, like a goal or a dream, but fear held you back? You thought about it, planned it out, but when it came time to act, fear showed up and made you freeze. Now, if that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And today we're going to talk about how to turn that specific fear into fuel. Now, let's talk about someone that we all know. Robert Downey Jr., right? Before he became Iron Man, he went through years of addiction, arrests, and struggles. His career was practically over. Studios didn't want to work with him because they feared he was just too much of a risk. Now imagine the fear he must have felt. Fear of never reclaiming his career, fear of failing again, and fear of public judgment. But instead of letting that fear define him, he decided to take control of his life. He didn't run from the fear. He used it as a signal. It told him, this is important. This is worth fighting for. So he sought help. He rebuilt his reputation and he stepped back into acting. Marvel didn't hand him the role of Iron Man without hesitation. They knew the risk, but Downey Jr. didn't let that stop him. He prepared, he showed up, and he delivered. And now he's one of the most iconic actors of our time. If Robert Downey Jr. had let fear rule him, he wouldn't be where he is today. And that same choice to face fear and move forward is something that we all have. Now, fear thrives in the unknown. It convinces us that failure, rejection, or pain is worse than staying where we are. And here's the thing about that. Staying stuck is its own kind of pain. We fear what might happen, but we don't think about what we're missing by not moving forward. Now, here's why fear grips us so tightly. First, fear of failure. The default mindset for fear of failure is if I fail, it means that I'm a failure. Failure often feels personal, but it's simply part of the learning process. The most successful people have failed more times than most people have even tried. Reframing failure as a necessary step towards growth removes the stigma and encourages taking action despite the risk. For example, think about Thomas Edison. When he was asked about his failures, he said, "I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that won't work." This simple mindset allowed him to persist and eventually succeed. The second thing is the fear of judgment. The default mindset to the fear of judgment is if I stumble, people will think less of me. And we often overestimate how much others are actually watching us or judging us. The truth is, most people are too preoccupied with their own lives to actually dwell on our mistakes. Real freedom comes from when you realize that external judgment doesn't define your worth. For example, public speakers often fear forgetting their lines, but the audience rarely notices small slip-ups. Authenticity often matters a lot more than perfection. Another reason why fear grips us so tightly is the fear of pain. And the default mindset to the fear of pain is that pain means that I should stop. Discomfort, whether emotional or physical, is a natural signal that you're stretching beyond your limit. Avoiding pain can keep you stuck, but leaning into it can lead to breakthroughs. Emotional pain, in particular, often signals areas where growth is needed. Athletes endure physical pain to improve performance, and similarly, working through emotional discomfort, like facing rejection, leads to stronger emotional resilience. But here's the shift. Fear isn't a dead end. It's a signal, a blinking light, alerting us that we're close to something meaningful. Fear often shows up when we're near something that could help us grow. And instead of asking, how do I get rid of this fear? Ask, what is this fear trying to actually tell me? The switch from avoiding fear to facing it is to actually start with recognizing that fear is important. It's not always a stop sign. Sometimes it's a compass. Think about David and Goliath. David didn't pretend that Goliath wasn't a giant. He faced him head on. He leaned into it, knowing that standing up against Goliath was necessary to become who he was meant to be. And here's the switch. Fear isn't a wall, it's a doorway. You just have to walk through it. Now, I'm going to give you some actionable steps that can really help you reel in this idea of using fear as a signal. And that could really help you, it's helped me as well, but it could really help you overcome fear as a crippling mechanism, but using fear as a signal mechanism. So the very first actionable step that you can take today is to recognize that fear is indeed a signal. The next time fear shows up, pause, ask yourself, is this fear pointing me towards something important? If the answer is yes, then lean into that. The second thing is to visualize the worst case scenario. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen here? Then I want you to actually plan how you would handle it and remember that fear shrinks when you shine a light on it. The third thing I want you to do is what's called a fear setting exercise. Write down what you're afraid of, then write how you could prevent it and how you recover if it happened. This would turn the fear into action. The fourth thing is that I want you to take a bold and very uncomfortable action or step. What that looks like is me wanting you to do something that scares you today, whether it's speaking up, applying for a job, or sharing your work. Action shrinks fear. The fifth thing is to use fear as a fuel. We talked about that earlier, but this is what that would look like. It would allow you to use fear as a motivation instead of stopping you, but to push you forward. If you're afraid to fail, use that energy to prepare even harder. The sixth thing I want you to do is I want you to figure out what your why is, and I want you to anchor to that why. I want you to grab a notebook and write down why facing this fear matters. Because fear fades when your reason for moving forward is stronger than your reason to stop. And writing this down, it creates a deep personal anchor that keeps you grounded when fear starts to creep in. This sixth reason is super important. I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into it. This particular practice allows you to turn your emotion into action. Fear is emotional, but writing is logical. By writing down your why, you bridge that gap between feeling stuck and taking action. It transforms vague motivation into something clear and actionable. So instead of just thinking, I want to be more confident, write down, I want to be more confident, so I can speak up in meetings and grow in my career. That gives that goal purpose. Now it's tied to something meaningful. The second thing is that it creates accountability, right? Thoughts can be very fleeting, but words on paper are concrete. Writing your reason holds you accountable. It's a physical reminder of why you started and why giving up isn't an option. For example, if your fear is public speaking, writing, I want to actually speak confidently so I can inspire others and lead by example, reminds you that pushing through fear serves as a greater purpose. The third thing is that it refocuses your mind when fear tries to take over. Fear grows when it's vague and undefined. A strong why cuts through that fear. When challenges come up, you can return to your written reason as a mental reset. For example, when self-doubt comes back around, reading that I'm doing this to show my family that growth is possible at any stage of life makes quitting feel less like an option. It makes you want to keep going further because there's a concrete reason as to why you want to do something. The fourth thing is that it builds an emotional resilience. Writing your why connects your goal to something bigger than yourself. This emotional connection builds resilience because it shifts the focus from the fear to the outcome. For example, when you say, I want to share my story to others so that they could feel less alone, that why is bigger than any fear of judgment. So, some actionable steps that you can take from everything I just said is to grab a notebook, write down the fear that you're facing, and then I want you to write, why does facing this fear matter to me? And be honest, be specific, and revisit this whenever fear starts to grow. Fear isn't going anywhere, but neither is your potential. The switch is deciding that your dreams are more important than your fear. So here's your challenge. Identify one thing you've been avoiding because of fear. Write it down. Then take one bold step towards it this week. And remember, fear is just a signal that you're on the edge of something worth pursuing. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope this encouraged you to take that step that you've been avoiding. And until next time, take care and keep on switching for the better. I know it was a whole lot today, but I think it's worth it. Ciao.